Alright, so here's the thing. The Boys is one of those rare shows that not only adapted a comic book, but arguably improved on it in almost every single way. That's not saying the comic is bad, it's wild, it's edgy, and it's definitely a product of its time, but if you've only seen the show and decided to check out the original material, there's a good chance you went, wait, this is the same story? Because honestly, no, not really. At this point, the show and the comic feel like two completely different takes on the same basic setup. A world where superheroes are jerks, the corporations that run them are worse, and regular people are just trying to survive. So in this video, let's dig into why The Boys TV series is seen by many as the superior version, and how it diverged from the original source material, and why these two versions of the same universe now feel like parallel worlds with totally different vibes. All that and more in today's video. So let's start with tone, because that's where the biggest shift happens. The comic, written by Garth Ennis and illustrated by Derek Robertson, is extremely over the top. Seriously, just read through the first 5 issues and you'll get the gist. That was the point. Ennis was trying to satirize superhero culture in the most brutal, no-holds-barred way possible. And that's pretty common with Ennis's writing style. Just check out Preacher or his run on The Punisher. Now the show, it's still edgy and violent, but it's also smarter. It's interested in characters. It's willing to slow down and make you feel something before blowing up a guy's head. It took the bones of Ennis's world and said, okay, what if we actually explored what made these characters tick instead of just making them disgusting all the time? So instead of just being gross for grossness sake, the show filters all that darkness through a more thoughtful, character-driven lens. You still get the jaw-dropping moments, the whale scene, the airplane scene, and, well, come to think of it, almost anything that Homelander does in the show, but it's all in the service of the story, not just to make you go, ew. And speaking of Homelander in the comics, Homelander is basically a one-dimensional psychopath. He's a monster from the start. There's not much more to him. He's terrifying and there's no nuance. The comic doesn't really have anything with his thing with Sitwell, considering that Sitwell is a man. There's no Ryanson, Soldier Boy isn't his dad. So there's not really much there in terms of personal stuff. Anthony Starr's version of Homelander is terrifying and actually pretty sad. And that's the difference. He's insecure, constantly seeking approval, and unhinged in public, but deeply broken in private. He's the kind of villain that you love to hate, but also find weirdly compelling because you can see the cracks in his god complex. He's a symbol of power without responsibility, but he's also a child who never learned how to be loved. That complexity, it doesn't exist in the comic. Comic Homelander is scary, but he's not interesting. Show Homelander is both. That's the strength behind the writing in the show. When The Boys first debuted as a TV series on Amazon Prime, it didn't take long for fans and newcomers alike to notice just how different it felt compared to most superhero media. It was violent, yeah, it was also crude, but it carried a sharp political edge and a layered narrative, and a surprisingly introspective view on power, celebrity, and morality. And while both versions shared a common foundation, the ideas of superheroes being corrupt and morally bankrupt tools of a corporate system, they branch out in drastically different directions. Over time, a general consensus has formed online among critics. The show is often seen as the superior version, and that's not always something that you hear when a comic book gets adapted. Usually people are quick to say that the source material is way better, but with The Boys it's different. The TV series is more than just a straight adaptation, it's a reinvention of the story into something a little bit more palatable for a general audience, not just the edgy section of the comic book crowd. And to really understand why people tend to favor the show, you have to look at what the comic was doing, what the show decided to change, and how those changes shaped the tone, structure, and really overall experience of the story. In the comics, The Boys lean heavily into shock value. It's a series that never really hesitates to push the boundaries often just because it can. That's satire, but it often feels buried under a layer of edgy, gross-out humor. Garth Ennis clearly had something to say about superheroes, especially with the way that they dominate modern pop culture, but he said it through a lens that was intentionally abrasive. For some, that rawness is the appeal. For others, it just comes off as edgy for edgy's sake. The show, on the other hand, tempers that tone. It still has the gore, it still has the adult content, but it uses those elements more selectively and arguably more effectively. Characters feel more grounded. The satire is sharper and often directly targeting real-world institutions and ideologies. And most importantly, the emotional core of the story hits harder. There's a weight to what happens on screen. A moment of violence feels like it matters. A betrayal or a death doesn't just pass by for shock. It becomes a turning point for the characters involved. We can take a look at someone like Homelander is a prime example. In both versions, he's terrifying, but in the comics, he's almost cartoonishly evil. In the show, he's much more complicated. Anthony Starr's performance adds layers of insecurity, desperation, and loneliness to the character. You still fear what he might do at any given moment, but you also understand what drives him. That complexity makes a better villain. You're not just waiting to see how he'll get taken down, you're watching to see if there's a breaking point or if there's even a small chance of redemption that he'll ultimately reject. And that added complexity isn't really just reserved for Homelander either. It runs through nearly every major character in the show. Take Billy Butcher for example. In the comic, he's a brutal, vengeful man who operates with a clear moral code. Supes are bad and they need to be taken down. He's efficient, ruthless, and unapologetic. He's a genuine psychopath to both Supes and members of his team. The TV version still holds on to that core, but gives us some more space to understand why he is the way he is. The show doesn't always try to make him likable, but it does make him human. The same goes for Huey. In the comic, Huey is modeled after Simon Pegg. Literally, they used his likeness, and he's more of a fish out of water who slowly hardens over time. In the show, Jack Quaid's version of Huey is a little bit more idealistic. He struggles more openly with the violence around him and questions his own role in it. He grows, but not at the expense of his empathy. The show makes it clear that what happens to him losing Robin, and being pulled into Butcher's world, learning the truth about the Vought, it leaves a mark. It doesn't just turn him into another Butcher, it gives him the chance to become something different. Even if that difference leads to him being covered in blood or being trapped in Tech Knight's smelly version of the Batcave. And that brings us to Vought itself. In the comic, Vought is mostly a shadowy corporation doing shady things behind the scenes. It was also called Vought America. It's evil, but in a straightforward way. The show, though, turns Vought into a fully realized stand-in for every real-world media empire and PR machine. They control the narratives, they own the news networks, they run social media, they shape public perception in a way that feels eerily close to how actual mega corporations operate. It's not just a company doing bad things, it's a system that thrives on misinformation and distraction and profit. That's the kind of update that makes the show feel a little bit more topical. Now, it's worth noting that none of this is to say the comic is without value. For its time, it was pretty bold and it was confrontational. It helped push the boundaries of what a superhero comic could look like, especially in a landscape still dominated by Marvel and DC's traditional fare. There are storylines in the comic that explore the abuse of power in ways that haven't really been tackled before on that scale, and its irreverent tone laid the groundwork for other deconstructionalist stories to come afterward. But in adapting it for television, the creators Eric Kripke and the team recognized that the raw material had the potential to be more than just outrageous. It could actually say something, and that shift in intent is what sets the world apart. For example, when you look at something like the Herogasm storyline, it's easy to see how the comic leaned all the way into the debauchery. It was meant to be shocking, even offensive. The show adapted that arc, but did so in a way that kept the absurdity while still moving the story and the characters forward. It wasn't just a visual spectacle, it had a moment where tensions actually came to a head, where major confrontations finally happened. The spectacle served a purpose, and it was a super important episode in season 3 that also just happened to have a super orgy as a backdrop. Even the way the show handles politics feels a little bit more refined. The comic dabbled in political satire, but the show dives right in. It draws clear parallels between the rise of superpowered nationalism and real-world extremism. It comments on media manipulation, celebrity worship, the militarization of law enforcement, and even the ways companies tokenize marginalized groups to appear progressive while doing really nothing of substance. All these themes are baked into the narrative, because at its core, the show is a satire, and the point of satire is to hold up a funhouse mirror and force you to stare at the reflection. Franchises like Marvel and DC will never go to the lengths that The Boys does because they still want that broad audience appeal. Meanwhile, The Boys isn't afraid to call out certain sections of the population and say, yeah, we've been making fun of you this whole time. What's interesting is that none of this seems to have alienated the fan base. If anything, it expanded it. The Boys TV show has become a hit, not in spite of its changes from the comic, but because of them. Viewers appreciate that the story doesn't really rely on shock, even though it still delivers those shocky moments. What keeps people coming back is the tension, the characters, and the slow unraveling of the power structures. It's a show that understands its audience is looking for more than just spectacle. They're looking for something to chew on with a little bit of spectacle. Something that makes them think, and maybe that's the biggest difference of all. The comic book was disruptive. It wanted to punch you in the face and leave you a little disturbed. The show, meanwhile, is disruptive too, but it wants you to sit with it afterwards. It's still wild and unpredictable, and at times absolutely unhinged, but it also has something on its mind, and today's landscape of endless superhero stories, that gives it a real edge. But those are just my thoughts on it. Let us know what you guys think in the comments down below. Remember to leave a hashtag mailbag question, and we'll see you guys next time.